My name is Margaret Hale, though just about everyone in the neighborhood calls me Maggie. I'm 74 years old, and I've lived in Ohio my entire life, long enough to watch factories close, neighbors come and go, and entire families rise and fall with the seasons. Long enough to know that winters here teach you a certain kind of patience, and summers teach you the value of shade. My house sits on a quiet street in a town most people have never heard of, the sort of place where mailboxes lean slightly from age and wooden porches creak like they're telling old stories. It's not a grand house, Lord knows it's not perfect, but it's mine, bought with 43 years of work as a school secretary. Typing, filing, calling parents, and handing out bandages and tissues to children who were always braver than they knew. For decades, that school was my world. I watched children grow, watched teachers retire, watched time carve lines into my face with the same stubbornness it carved cracks into the school's brick walls. When my husband Thomas passed away 12 years ago, I poured myself into my routines. Morning coffee, the crossword, sweeping the porch, tending to the rose bush he planted the year we got married. A quiet life, a modest one, but a life with dignity. And then there is Daniel, my son, my only child. If you've lived long enough, you know this truth. Children don't always grow into the people we imagined. Daniel was brilliant in his youth, charming in the way boys often are when they don't yet understand the weight of their own words. He could make me laugh even on days when grief felt like a wet coat I couldn't take off. But somewhere between the dreams he chased and the years he lost, he learned to love shortcuts. He learned to resent responsibility. And he learned, quietly, gradually, to look at me not as the mother who raised him, but as a safety net he believed would always stay open. Still, he's my son. And mothers hold on, don't they? Sometimes far longer than they should. On most days now, the house is quiet. I knit, I read, I make tea that sits too long and cools before I remember to drink it. I keep the television on low just for the company of voices. And every so often, when the wind shifts a certain way, I swear I can hear Thomas calling my name from the garden, telling me the tomatoes need more sun. I live simply. I save carefully. Every penny has a purpose. That's something you learn when you grow up with nothing and build a life inch by inch. I never asked for much, never needed much. The only thing I truly wanted, the thing I believed in, was that my son would be all right, that he'd have a better life than mine, that he'd learn to stand taller than the odds stacked against him. But as the years went by, I began to notice something unsettling. At first, it was small. A sigh from Daniel when I didn't answer the phone fast enough. A sharp tone when I asked him to repeat something. A dismissive wave of the hand when I offered advice. Little cracks. Hairline fractures in a relationship I thought was strong enough to weather anything. Mom, you don't get how things work now. Don't worry about that. You'll just get confused. Let me handle it. You'll only make it harder. Words meant to sound helpful, but sharpened at the edges. It happened gradually, like a shadow lengthening across a room at dusk. And I told myself, as mothers often do, he's stressed, he's overwhelmed, he doesn't mean it. But then came the moment I could not forget. One Sunday afternoon, I baked his favorite lemon bread and waited for him to stop by. He arrived late, much later than he said he would, and he barely stepped inside before he began talking about my finances. Not asking, talking. He said things like, "You shouldn't be managing your own bills anymore. You're not good with numbers. You need someone who actually knows what they're doing." I opened my mouth to respond, to remind him that I had managed a school office for 4 decades, that I had balanced budgets, that I had paid my bills on time since the day I married his father. But he didn't give me the space. He kept going. "You don't have much value in this area, Mom. I'm trying to help you, but you make it difficult." Value. The word stung. Then he muttered something under his breath as he walked into the kitchen. "Sometimes I wonder what you'd even do without me. It's not like you're worth much in this part of life." Worth much. Worth less. Worth nothing. It doesn't matter how soft the voice is when someone says something like that. It finds a way to echo. I stood there holding a warm loaf of lemon bread in my hands and felt the room tilt slightly, as if the house itself was reacting. I watched my son, my baby, rummage through my paperwork drawer without asking, his tone clipped, his body tense, his words careless. I didn't say anything then, not because I agreed, not because I was afraid, but because disbelief has a way of paralyzing you, especially when it comes from someone you love. I swallowed the hurt. I told myself he was stressed, that he didn't mean it, that maybe I was being sensitive. But something deep in my bones whispered, "This is the beginning of something, and you must pay attention." In the days that followed, Daniel's behavior grew stranger. He began showing up unannounced. He asked pointed questions about my savings. He hinted about the future in ways that felt less like concern and more like calculation. And every time I tried to assert myself, he dismissed me with a tone that chipped away at my dignity. "Mom, stop. Don't make this harder. You're not thinking straight. You're lucky I'm stepping in." Lucky. Another word that settled under my skin like ice. The truth? I didn't feel lucky. I felt erased. Like someone had taken an eraser to my name, my abilities, my worth, little by little, stroke by stroke, until I was just a faint outline of someone who once mattered. By the end of that week, I began to notice things out of place. A bank statement on the wrong table, a folder missing from the top drawer, a checkbook left slightly open, a brochure for assisted financial planning tucked into my mail pile. Small things, easy to ignore, easy to excuse, but they were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't yet dared to assemble. Because some truths, some betrayals, you don't allow yourself to see until they are staring you straight in the face. And mine was coming. Quietly, steadily, with the weight of someone I had loved my entire life. Someone who was about to call me worthless in a way that would break something inside me and awaken something stronger. After that Sunday evening, something subtle but unmistakable shifted inside my home. It wasn't anything visible, nothing moved, nothing broken, nothing dramatic, but the air changed. The quiet corners of the house, the ones that had always held peace, began holding something else, an uneasiness, a tension, a watchfulness that wasn't mine. Daniel started stopping by more often, always with a tone that danced between concern and criticism, as if the line between those two things no longer existed for him. He'd walk through my doorway like someone entering a room they already owned. He'd pick up mail without asking, glance at my bills, skim through envelopes, and comment on things that were never his business in the first place. I would be folding laundry or watering plants, and suddenly he was behind me, asking why I paid a certain amount, why a bill was due that week, why I hadn't reordered a medication yet. At first, I told myself he meant well, that he was trying to help, that getting older meant accepting a little interference. I told myself this because it was easier than admitting the truth, that his visits no longer felt like a son checking on his mother, but like someone taking inventory of a house they intended to renovate without permission. One afternoon, he picked up my checkbook and didn't bother hiding the frown on his face. "Why did you pay the electric bill twice?" he snapped, as if catching a child misbehaving. "I didn't," I answered gently. "One is the regular bill, the other is the winter payment plan." He didn't even let me finish. "Mom, you're losing track of things. You're slipping." Slipping. The word landed cold. "I'm not slipping," I said softly. But he had already dismissed my voice, dismissed the decades I'd managed my life, dismissed the woman who raised him. "Honestly," he muttered, still flipping through the checkbook, "you're becoming more trouble than you're worth." There it was. Worth. That word again, whispered behind my back, now spoken to my face. A word that cuts deeper than age ever could. I didn't argue. I just watched him place the checkbook back down, not with care, but with the careless detachment of someone shelving an item they don't value. And that was only the beginning. Small things around the house began to change in ways that didn't feel accidental. My appointment calendar was rearranged. A pharmacy called about a prescription pickup I never requested. A neighbor casually mentioned seeing Daniel near my mailbox when I hadn't asked him to stop by. One morning, a bank envelope arrived already opened. The seal wasn't torn. It had been opened cleanly, carefully, as though someone wanted the information but not the evidence. When Daniel came that evening, I asked softly, "Did you bring in my mail today?" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, you never check it on time anyway." That sentence, spoken so casually, told me more than any accusation ever could. But nothing prepared me for what happened the night I invited him for dinner. I had made pot roast, the same pot roast he'd loved since he was 8. I set the table with the blue-patterned plates he always admired. I hoped, foolishly maybe, that food would soften him, that the boy who used to run into my arms would show up again. Instead, he walked straight past the table, straight to a folder of bank papers sitting on my coffee table, and opened it without asking. "Mom," he said, shaking his head, "why do you have this much sitting in savings? You should have let me take over years ago. You don't know what you're doing anymore." "I've managed my finances perfectly well," I answered quietly. He turned toward me, and the look on his face was not worry. It was superiority. "Mom, you're not capable anymore. You forget things. You repeat yourself. You don't keep up. Financially speaking," he paused, as if choosing the most painful phrasing, "you're becoming worthless." Worthless. A word no mother should ever hear from the child she raised. A word that presses down on the heart like a winter storm. A word that changes everything. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't defend myself the way he expected. I simply stood there, holding on to the back of a chair, feeling something inside me fracture and reform at the same time. After that night, evidence of something far darker began to appear. A missing check, a withdrawal I didn't remember authorizing, an application for a credit card I had never requested. And then, the worst, a document on my desk with my signature forged. Clumsily, shakily, but undeniably forged. Someone had tried to become me. Someone had tried to take over my life, legally, financially, quietly. And I knew exactly who that someone was. That night, long after the house fell silent, I sat at my kitchen table with my hands spread flat on the surface, grounding myself. The air felt still, as if waiting for me to decide what kind of woman I would become next. Daniel's words echoed in my mind. Worthless, incapable, slipping, each one carrying the weight of a verdict he thought he had the right to declare. But as I looked at the forged papers, the missing checks, the violated trust, another voice rose up inside me, my own voice, steady and quiet and fierce. "Worthless is not what I am," I whispered. but it is exactly what he will feel when truth finally comes for him. For the first time in a long time, something powerful unfurled in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Not revenge, not yet. But certainty. Certainty that I would not let him take the life I had built. Certainty that I would not let him define my worth. Certainty that I would take back every penny and every piece of myself he tried to diminish. And so, without telling anyone, without trembling, without hesitation, I began to plan. I didn't sleep much the night I found the forged document, not out of fear, that part had already passed, but out of something sharper, clearer, almost cold. A new awareness had settled inside me, the kind that made every sound in the house feel different. The refrigerator's hum, the heater's sigh, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. All of them felt like witnesses. Witnesses to the moment a woman decides she is done being dismissed. By morning, I had already made my choice. If Daniel was quietly building a case to take control of my life, then I would quietly build one to protect it. I didn't confront him. Confrontation gives people like him room to twist, manipulate, rewrite. No, I needed truth, not theatrics. So I began with small things. I took photos of the forged signature, steadying my hand as if documenting a crime scene no one else knew existed. I logged the dates of missing checks, the withdrawals I didn't authorize, the envelopes opened without my consent. I wrote everything in a little blue notebook I kept hidden inside the cover of an old cookbook. No one ever looked in there. Daniel certainly wouldn't. He never cared much for recipes unless someone else was cooking them. A week passed, then another. Daniel kept coming, acting as though nothing had changed. He spoke with that same clipped tone, the same impatience, the same calculated superiority, unaware that every visit now offered me another piece of proof. Whenever he said something cruel, I made note of the exact words. Whenever he moved papers without asking, I wrote down the time. Whenever he lingered near my mail or my desk, I wrote a description of his behavior. It was like placing stones, one by one, into a foundation I knew I would eventually stand on. But the real turning point didn't come from him. It came from an unexpected place. It happened on a Thursday morning when I went to the old community center to return some donated blankets. I hadn't planned to stay. I hadn't planned to talk to anyone. I just wanted to drop them off and go on with my day. But as I was leaving, I heard someone call my name. Margaret? I turned, surprised. It was Robert, an old acquaintance, though that word barely captured what he once meant in my life. He had been Thomas's best friend years ago, a kind, steady man who used to help him fix the gutters and sometimes stayed afterward for coffee. After Thomas died, I drifted from most people, including him. He looked older, of course. We both did. But his eyes were still the same, gentle, observant, the eyes of someone who sees before they speak. "I haven't seen you in ages," he said. "You look tired. Everything all right?" For a moment, I nearly said yes. Years of habit, years of keeping burdens quiet, almost answered for me. But something in his expression softened something in me. "Actually," I said slowly, "no, not really." He didn't push. He just nodded and gestured toward a small table near the window. "Sit with me?" I don't know why I said yes. Maybe because the weight I had been carrying finally wanted a place to rest. Maybe because I needed to tell someone who wouldn't dismiss me. Maybe because I knew, instinctively, that trusted witnesses matter. So I sat, and in a voice low enough to stay within that small corner of the room, I told him about the open mail, the withdrawn funds, the comments Daniel had made, the forged signature. I spoke slowly, watching his expression shift from concern to disbelief to something harder, something protective. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled, long and controlled. "Margaret," he said, "this isn't just hurtful, it's illegal." The words felt heavy, but grounding. Someone else was naming what I had only dared to whisper in my mind. "You can't face this alone. You know that, don't you?" I looked down at my hands, the hands that had raised a son, buried a husband, built a life. "I'm not helpless," I said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but even strong women deserve help." He reached into his coat pocket and slid a card toward me. Simple, white, with a name printed cleanly across the center. "Laura Spencer," I read aloud. "She's a financial advocate," he explained. "She works with older adults, especially in cases of exploitation or coercion. She's good, very good, and she doesn't let things like this get buried." I hesitated. Calling her would make all of this real. Calling her would mean admitting that my own son had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Just talk to her," Robert said gently. "You don't have to commit to anything." So the next day, with trembling fingers and a heart that felt heavier than usual, I called the number. Laura answered with a calm, even tone, the kind of voice that knows storms well and doesn't flinch at the sight of waves. I told her everything, the same way I had told Robert, but this time I added the part I had been too ashamed to say aloud. "I think he's trying to take control of my finances, maybe more." There was a pause on her end, a thoughtful, measured silence. "Mrs. Hale," she said finally, "what you're describing is not uncommon, and it's not your fault. You have more power than you think. If you're willing, I'd like to meet with you, privately, and we'll start building a protective barrier around your accounts, one he can't touch." A barrier, a boundary, a shield. Words that felt like warm hands on my shoulders. We met the next day at her office. She wore a navy blazer and had eyes that didn't miss a single detail. I brought my notebook, my photos, the forged document. She examined everything carefully. "This," she said, tapping the forged signature with her pen, "is evidence of attempted financial manipulation, potentially even fraud." I swallowed hard. Hearing it stated so plainly made a wave of emotion rise in my chest. Fear, grief, shame, and something else. Relief. "You've been documenting everything perfectly," she added. "Most people don't think to do that. You're not as powerless as he thinks you are." It was the first time in months I felt the shape of myself returning. Then she said something that changed the entire direction of the story. "Margaret, before we protect your money, we need to know what he's planning. If he's trying to gain legal control over your assets, there will be signs, paperwork, inquiries, attempts to gather information about your estate." The word estate sent a chill down my spine. She gave me a list of things to monitor discreetly: accounts, mail, certain government notices, unusual phone calls. She also placed a confidential alert on my bank profile, meaning no changes could be made without my direct confirmation in person. "Now," she said, folding her hands, "we wait and we prepare." But life had a way of moving faster than our preparation. Because 2 weeks later, the truth landed on my doorstep, literally, in the form of a thick white envelope addressed not to me, but about me. An official packet from the county courthouse. A petition. A petition filed by my own son, claiming I was no longer able to manage my finances independently. A petition requesting legal authority over my accounts, my home, my decisions, my life. It was all there in cold print. And he'd filed it without telling me, without warning, without shame. My hands trembled so hard the envelope nearly slipped from my fingers. But then something remarkable happened. The trembling stopped, my breathing steadied, and a calm, undeniable truth washed through me. He had just handed me the final piece of proof. He thought he was sealing my fate, but he was revealing his intentions, and he had no idea that I was no longer the woman he thought I could manipulate. I picked up the phone, not to call him, not to plead, not to ask why. I called Laura. I called Robert, and I said with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, "It's time." Because now I knew exactly what I was fighting against and exactly how far he was willing to go. And I would go farther. Because I wasn't just protecting money. I was protecting the life I had built, the woman I still was, and the dignity no one, not even a son, had the right to take from me. When I hung up the phone after speaking with Laura and Robert, the house fell into a quiet so deep it felt almost sacred. The kind of silence that isn't empty at all, but full of decision, full of direction, full of the quiet weight of a woman who finally sees the truth clearly. I placed the courthouse envelope on the kitchen table and sat in front of it, not as someone defeated, but as someone studying the battlefield. The petition was dense, printed on thick ivory paper, meant to look official and intimidating. But intimidation only works on those who don't know their worth, and I was beginning to remember mine. I read every line, every accusation, couched in polite legal phrasing. Concern for her well-being, noticed signs of cognitive decline, difficulty managing financial obligations. Words meant to paint a picture, not of who I was, but of who he needed me to be in order to take what I had. Near the end of the document, one sentence made my breath catch. Petitioner requests expedited authority over all financial accounts, real property, and disbursements on behalf of the respondent. In plain terms, he wanted control of everything, and he wanted it quickly. My son had prepared a cage and expected the judge to lock me inside before I even had the chance to speak. But he didn't know that I had already begun preparing, quietly, methodically, carefully, the same way I had once cataloged thousands of files at the school, making sure every story found its rightful place. The next morning, I met with Laura again. Her office, normally filled with warm light and softly humming air purifiers, felt sharper now, not unwelcoming, but alert, a place where truth didn't hide in shadows. I laid the petition on her desk. She read it silently, her eyes moving quickly, her fingers tracing the margins. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm but edged with steel. "He moved fast," she said, "faster than most." I asked. "It tells me he's afraid," she replied, "which means you already disrupted his plan." That sentence, "you disrupted his plan," warmed something inside me, the way a hearth warms a winter room. I had been so focused on avoiding defeat that I had already won the first small victory. Laura pulled out a yellow legal pad and began listing actions. Not orders, not commands, invitations for me to step into my own defense. "We're going to respond to this petition," she said, "and not defensively. We are going to counter it." "How?" I asked. "With evidence," she answered, "with patterns, with the truth he didn't expect you to document." For an hour, we went through my notebook, every date, every withdrawal, every forged signature, every opened envelope. She photographed everything, scanned documents, labeled files. The more she organized, the more the story took shape. Not the story Daniel wanted the court to believe, but the real one. Then she asked a question I hadn't considered. Do you have anyone else who can speak to your character? Someone who has known you for years? I thought for a moment. Yes, I said softly. I do. Robert. He had known me before Daniel was even born. He had known Thomas. He had known the woman I was long before age and grief and loneliness made my voice softer. And more importantly, he had seen the change in Daniel without being influenced by family loyalty. The next day, he met us at Laura's office. He sat across from her, hands folded on the table, posture straight, a man ready to stand in truth, even if it meant standing alone. I've watched the way her son speaks to her, he said steadily. I've seen him open things that weren't his. I've heard him criticize her for things she didn't do wrong. And I know the difference between concern and control. What he's doing isn't love, it's possession. Laura nodded and took notes. And you're willing to testify? She asked. He didn't even blink. Of course. His voice was simple but strong, steady, unshakable. That alone felt like someone placing a hand on my back when I needed balance the most. Over the next week, the three of us worked like a small, determined army. We contacted the bank. We collected transaction histories. We compiled phone logs, voicemail recordings, pharmacy notices, and witness statements. Laura explained each step, each document, each strategy. We're not just disproving his petition, she said. We're proving a pattern of financial exploitation. The court takes that very seriously. The word exploitation still stung, even though I knew it was accurate. But hearing it spoken by a professional, not whispered in shame inside my own mind, made it feel less like a secret and more like the truth finally standing in daylight. Then came the moment that tied everything together. Laura received a set of subpoenaed records. She opened them slowly, scanning the pages. "Margaret," she murmured, her brow tightening, "you should see this." She turned the document toward me. There it was, a notarized form with my name typed neatly at the top, a form I had allegedly signed 3 months earlier, granting Daniel temporary authority over my accounts in the event of cognitive lapse. The signature was mine, or rather, someone's attempt to copy it. The loops were wrong, the stroke pressure inconsistent. The shape of the M curved in the opposite direction. It wasn't just forged, it was clumsy. Something hot flickered inside my chest. Not fear, not even sadness anymore, but a deep humiliation mixed with a deeper resolve. He didn't just want control, I whispered. He planned for it. And he rushed the petition because he knew you were starting to question him. Laura leaned back in her chair. This is the strongest evidence we have. And trust me, a forged financial authorization is not something the courts take lightly. I stared at the paper, the one meant to erase me. But instead of shrinking, I felt myself grow. This wasn't the story of an aging woman losing her independence. This was the story of a mother discovering the strength she had forgotten she owned. "When is the hearing?" I asked. "Next month," Laura said. "And Margaret, we're going to win, but I need you to be strong when the time comes." "I will be," I answered, and I meant it. For the next several days, I prepared myself, not the way someone prepares for a fight, but the way someone prepares for truth. I cleaned the house, not out of nervousness, but out of clarity. I made lists, not out of fear, but out of steadiness. I found old photographs that reminded me of who I was long before worry made me doubt my own memory. I even stood at the mirror one morning, looked into my own reflection, and said quietly, "You are not what he says you are." The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, Ohio winter settling over the ground like a heavy quilt. I wore my best navy coat, the one Thomas always said made me look dignified. Robert drove me, his presence as grounding as the earth beneath the tires. Laura met us at the courthouse steps, her expression calm, confident, purposeful. But inside those walls, as I sat waiting on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, Daniel walked in through the opposite door. He looked startled, not because I was there, but because I looked nothing like the fragile woman he had described in his petition. He expected a confused old woman clutching papers she didn't understand. What he saw instead was a steady woman with 2 advocates at her side, a stack of evidence in her hands, and fire in her eyes. He hesitated. I didn't. For the first time in months, he was the one who looked unsure. And in that moment, I understood something that I will never forget. They only call you worthless when they fear your worth. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of room where hundreds of lives had been rearranged before mine ever entered it. I sat beside Laura at the long table, my hands folded in my lap, my heartbeat steady in a way that surprised even me. Robert sat right behind us, a warm presence in the cold air, the kind that anchors a person without saying a word. Across the aisle, Daniel sat with his attorney, flipping through his papers with the confidence of a man who expected the world to reward him simply because he asked. He didn't look at me, not once. That, more than anything, told me he knew the foundation beneath him had begun to crack. When the judge entered, everyone rose. His robe swept the floor as he sat, glasses perched low on his nose, the kind of man who had seen far too many sons and daughters use the law to disguise greed as concern. "This is the matter of guardianship petition number," he began, reading the case details aloud. Hearing my own name in that room, Margaret Ann Hale, made everything suddenly feel both unreal and painfully real. I wasn't a character in a story. I wasn't a whisper in someone else's home. I was here to defend my own life. Daniel's attorney spoke first. His voice was smooth, calm, almost rehearsed. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mr. Whitman has grave concerns about his mother's ability to manage her finances. He has witnessed forgetfulness, scattered record-keeping, and decision-making that raises red flags for her well-being. He is simply trying to protect her." The word protect made Laura's jaw tighten. Daniel finally looked at me then, not with love, not with shame, but with the kind of expression people wear when they expect someone to crumble on cue. I simply met his gaze and didn't blink. When it was our turn, Laura stood slowly, smoothing her jacket. "Your Honor, the evidence will show the opposite. Mrs. Hale is not suffering cognitive decline. She is not unable to manage her finances. What she is a victim of exploitation by the very person claiming to protect her." The ripple moved across the courtroom like wind through tall grass. Laura continued, her voice steady but edged with unmistakable conviction. "We will demonstrate patterns of unauthorized withdrawals, coercive behavior, forged documentation, and intentional isolation. We will show that the petitioner's concerns are not grounded in reality, but in self-interest." Daniel shifted in his seat. Laura called the first witness, me. I walked to the stand with small, careful steps, not out of fear, but out of reverence for what this moment meant. I raised my hand, took the oath, and sat down, my spine straight, my hands folded. Laura began gently. "Mrs. Hale, can you tell the court why we're here today?" I took a breath, not shaky, not broken, a breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. "My son filed a petition to take control of my life," I said, "but I am not the one who needs protecting." The courtroom went still. I spoke about the withdrawals, the missing statements, the belittling comments disguised as concern. The day I confronted him, the forged document with my name bent into shapes I had never written. I described how I had been made to feel small in my own home, slowly, quietly, consistently, until I started doubting truths I had known all my life. At one point, my voice trembled, not with fear, but with grief. Grief for the motherhood I had given wholeheartedly, unaware of how it would one day be used against me. Then it was Daniel's attorney's turn to question me. He tried to rattle me. He failed. "Mrs. Hale, are you certain you didn't authorize these withdrawals?" "I am," I answered firmly. "And is it possible you simply forgot?" "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "It is not." He tried again. "You claim the signature isn't yours. How can you be sure?" I leaned forward slightly. "Because my name belongs to me, and I know how I write it." A soft murmur rose behind me. Even the judge's eyebrow lifted. Next, Robert was called. He spoke with a quiet integrity that could steady a collapsing house. He described what he'd witnessed, the disrespect, the manipulation, the slow erosion of my confidence. When Daniel's attorney asked, "Are you implying Mr. Hale is lying?" Robert didn't even flinch. "I'm not implying anything," he said. "I'm telling you what I saw." The judge nodded, impressed. Then came the turning point, the document. Laura held it up for the courtroom to see. "Your Honor, this is the alleged authorization granting Mr. Hale temporary authority over his mother's accounts. We have obtained handwriting analysis suggesting significant inconsistency, and we will call the bank representative who flagged the signature as suspicious." The judge took the document, examined it closely, tracing the shaky lines with his finger. "Mr. Hale," he said suddenly, "did you witness your mother sign this?" Daniel froze. His attorney hesitated. "Your Honor, we don't have confirmation." "I'm asking, Mr. Hale," the judge repeated. Daniel swallowed, hard. I don't remember," he muttered. But it was too late. Everyone knew the truth. The final blow came when Laura submitted the file with the dates of withdrawals, showing my money being used for personal purchases immediately after Daniel visited my home. Spa trips, electronic purchases, restaurant bills, and one charge that made the entire courtroom shift uncomfortably: a diamond bracelet. None of it mine. When Laura finished, the courtroom fell into a silence so tight it felt like the air itself was listening. The judge leaned back, fingers pressed together under his chin. He looked at Daniel first. "Mr. Hale," he said slowly, "this court is deeply concerned with what appears to be a pattern of financial exploitation. Your petition does not demonstrate concern. It demonstrates control." Daniel's face drained of color. Then the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Hale, I am denying the guardianship petition in full. You remain in control of your life and your finances. Furthermore, I am issuing a protective order forbidding the petitioner from accessing your accounts in any capacity." I felt something in my chest loosen, a knot I hadn't realized had been tightening for years. Daniel stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. She's lying. She's confused." The judge slammed his gavel once. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. Your mother is neither confused nor incapable. She is, in fact, remarkably clear." The hearing ended. People began to file out, but Daniel remained seated, hands shaking, not with empathy, but with the fury of a man's entitlement had finally been confronted. I stood, gathering my papers. As I walked past him, he whispered harshly, "You'll regret this." I stopped, turned. And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as my son, but as a man who had made choices that only he could answer for. "No, Daniel," I said softly. "For the first time, I won't." When I stepped out of the courthouse, the Ohio winter sun hit my face, pale but warm enough to feel like something was beginning again. Laura squeezed my shoulder. Robert held the door for me. And as we walked toward the car, I realized something powerful. I had taken back far more than my money. I had taken back my voice, my autonomy, my worth. Every penny and every piece of myself had come home to me. When I returned home from the courthouse that afternoon, the sky over Ohio had turned a faded shade of lavender, the kind of color that appears only on cold days. Soft, muted, honest. I stood for a moment in my driveway before going inside, letting the silence settle around me like an old quilt. For years, that silence had frightened me. Now, it just felt like peace. I pushed the door open and stepped into my small living room, the one with the knitted throw over the back of the couch and the framed photographs lining the mantel. It looked the same as it had that morning, but something in the air felt different, lighter, clearer, like dust had finally begun to lift from a long neglected corner. For the first time in years, I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't brace myself for criticism or accusation. I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me what I should be afraid of. I closed the door behind me, slid the lock into place, and simply breathed. Not carefully, not cautiously, but fully. I took off my coat, hung it on the hook by the door, and walked to the kitchen. The kettle felt warm in my hand, familiar as a friend who doesn't ask for explanations. As I filled it, my reflection in the window caught my eye. Not the tired woman who had once questioned her own mind, but someone steadier. Someone who had survived the kind of betrayal that can hollow a person out and yet had refused to disappear. As the kettle began to hum, I whispered into the quiet, "You did it." The words weren't triumphant. They weren't even loud. They were simply true. I carried my tea to the table, the same one where I had stared at bank statements that didn't make sense, where I had felt confusion gnawing at the edges of my confidence. Now, sitting there again, the memories didn't sting the way they once had. Pain, I realized, changes shape when it's finally named. The sun dipped lower, brushing the tops of the houses across the street. A warm light washed through the window, catching on the rim of my mug. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the heat seep into places that had long felt cold. A quiet knock came at the door. It wasn't forceful, not urgent, just gentle. When I opened it, Robert stood there with a small bag of groceries in his arms. His smile was soft. "I thought you could use something warm tonight," he said. Inside the bag were fresh rolls, a jar of vegetable soup he had made, and a note folded neatly on top. I opened it right there in the doorway. "Proud of you. You deserve the kind of life that doesn't ask you to shrink." My throat tightened, not from sorrow, but from the kind of gratitude that feels too big for words. I hugged him, brief but sincere, and for a moment the loneliness I had carried for so long softened. After he left, I warmed the soup and ate by the window, listening to the quiet hum of evening settling in. Lights flickered on in neighboring homes. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere a wind chime sang, to no one in particular. Everything felt ordinary, and yet nothing was quite the same. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I paused in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at me was older, yes, lines around her eyes, silver in her hair, but she was also stronger in ways she had never been allowed to recognize. She had stood in a courtroom and spoken truths that once terrified her. She had defended a lifetime of dignity. She had faced the son she loved and refused to let love make her small. I touched the edge of the mirror lightly and whispered, "You're still here." It wasn't a reminder, it was a victory. As I pulled back the covers, the house seemed to breathe with me. The floorboards settled, the heater clicked softly. The night air pressed cool fingertips against the windows. And in that stillness, a realization rose gently inside me. Worth isn't something another person gives you. Worth is something you reclaim when you finally stop apologizing for having it. I turned off the lamp and lay beneath the quilt, letting the quiet settle around me like a final exhale after years of holding breath. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't afraid of my own thoughts. I felt free. Not from responsibility, not from age, but from the weight of believing I was less than what I had always been. Before sleep pulled at me, I whispered into the darkness, "You are not worthless." The words settled into the room like a benediction, and somewhere deep in my chest, something answered back, "You never were." If you're listening to this, wherever you are, whatever you've endured, I want you to hear the truth the world tried to hide from me. You can reclaim what was taken from you, your voice, your dignity, your sense of self. You can start again no matter who told you that you couldn't. And you don't have to do it alone. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you love, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more true stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet strength found in ordinary women, consider subscribing to our channel. There are many more stories waiting for you. And maybe, someday, one of them will be yours.